the room goes dead silent. Every single student in that auditorium is staring at the same spot, at me. And I know exactly why. Because 30 seconds ago, the ranking board updated, and my name, the name everyone laughed at, the name that sat at the very bottom of the Academy's power chart for 2 full years, just jumped straight to the top. Not second place. Not third. First. And I didn't even try. Let me back up, because the story doesn't start with glory. It starts in the dirt. My name is Kael, and for the last 2 years I have been the joke of the Zenith Academy. Not the lovable underdog, not the scrappy kid everyone secretly roots for. The actual, full-on, bottom-of-the-barrel disgrace that professors use as an example of what not to become. The guy whose name shows up on motivational posters in the library that say, "And I wish I was making this up. Even failure teaches a lesson." That poster has my photo on it. The Zenith Academy is not a regular school. It's the most elite hunter training institution in the country. They take in roughly 500 students a year. Every single one of them has already awakened a skill, already proven they can fight, hunt, or manipulate mana at a functional level. The weakest kid here is still terrifying compared to the average person on the street. The strongest? They've already drawn attention from S-rank guilds and government defense units. And then there's me. I got in because of a scholarship. Not a skills scholarship. An academic scholarship. Pure grades. Pure theory. Perfect written scores. The recruitment board debated for 3 weeks before finally letting me in. And the moment I walked through those gates, every person with eyes could see what the numbers already showed. My skill rank was F. F1 letter, the lowest possible classification. It means your awakened ability is essentially decorative. Maybe you can light a small candle with mana. Maybe you can lift a coffee cup without touching it. You are, in technical terms, a civilian in a school full of warriors. My skill? I could detect the weight of objects within 1 meter. That's it. That was my power. I could feel how heavy things were. Without scales, the professors didn't even bother ranking me in combat training. They gave me a pass on practical exams because the liability waiver was longer than my actual scores. For 2 years, I studied theory, survived by being invisible, and watched people I started with become actual powerhouses. My original dormmate, a guy named Lorik, went from C ranks to A ranks in 18 months. He didn't bother hiding that he'd stopped thinking of us as equals. Nobody did. The worst part wasn't the insults. It was the assumption that I already knew I didn't belong here, that I was just passing time before the inevitable withdrawal or expulsion, that my being here was mildly embarrassing for everyone involved, including me. I got used to it, mostly. Then came the assessment week. Assessment week happens every 6 months at Zenith. Every student gets reevaluated. Skills can grow. Ranks can shift. New abilities can develop or unlock entirely. For most students, it's a formality, a chance to confirm progress and update official records. For a few, it's a genuine advancement moment. For me, historically, it's been 2 full days of sitting in evaluation rooms, while technicians try very hard not to look sorry for me. This time felt the same. I walked in, I sat down. The evaluator, Professor Min, a sharp-faced woman who always wore the expression of someone who'd rather be somewhere else, glanced at my file and then at me with that familiar, quiet pity. "Kael, skill evaluation. Please place your hand on the resonance core." I placed my hand on the core. The core was a polished crystal sphere about the size of a basketball. It read your mana signature, measured output, analyzed skill compatibility, and produced a rank score. Every student in the room got their number displayed on a small screen, visible only to the evaluator. Privacy policy. Professor Min looked at the screen. She looked at me. She looked at the screen again. She stood up. That had never happened before. In 2 years of evaluations, no professor had ever physically stood up during my session. They sat, they noted, they moved on. Standing was not part of the routine. "Stay here," she said. Her voice was very controlled, too controlled. "Don't move. Don't touch anything." She left the room. I sat there alone with the resonance core still humming faintly under my hand. wondering what kind of catastrophic malfunction I just caused. Maybe I'd broken the machine. Maybe there was a new category for skills, so useless they needed a special designation. F-, double F. The negative zone. She came back in 4 minutes, with 2 other professors. One of them I recognized, Professor Aldrich, head of the Combat Awakening Department, a man who had never once spoken to me in 2 years. The other was a woman I didn't know, who wore a badge that said Academy Research Division. All 3 of them stared at the screen. Then they looked at me. "Can you explain," Professor Min said very carefully, "what you did?" "I put my hand on the core," I said. "Nothing else?" "Nothing else." More silence. Professor Aldrich leaned down and typed something into the evaluation console. He read whatever came up, and his jaw went tight. The research division woman took out her own device and started scanning the core from a different angle. I wanted to ask what was happening. I didn't. Something in the air told me to stay very still and very quiet. Finally, Professor Aldrich straightened up and looked at me the way you'd look at something that shouldn't exist. "Your skill has changed," he said. "What?" "Your original classification, weight detection at F ranks, is no longer present in your signature." He paused. "What's present is something the system hasn't categorized before. The classification engine is returning a reading we've never seen from a student." "What reading?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said it. "SSS." The room had no reaction because there was nobody else in the room. But inside my head, everything went completely silent in a different way. The kind of silence that happens right before something massive lands. SS-rank. That's not a real rank for students. That's not even a real rank for active hunters. The official skill tier system goes F, E, D, C, B, A, S. 7 levels. The entire hunter infrastructure of the country runs on those 7 tiers. An S-rank hunter is a national asset. There are fewer than 40 in the entire country. They get their own government liaison. They get their faces on things. They are, for all practical purposes, weapons of mass significance. SSS isn't on the chart. SSS is what researchers use in theoretical papers when discussing hypothetical upper limits that have never actually manifested. It's an academic placeholder for abilities that, in practice, don't exist, until apparently now. "There has to be an error," I said. "We ran the diagnostic 3 times," the research division woman said, not looking up from her scanner. "The core is functioning correctly. The signature is genuine. What does the skill do?" The 3 professors exchanged a look that I could not read. "We don't know yet," Professor Min said. "The system identified it as a foundational ability, but the output classification is beyond standard parameters. We'd need full testing to determine the scope." "How soon?" "Today. Right now, if you're willing." I was willing. They moved me to a restricted testing lab on the 4th basement floor of the academy. I had been in this building every day for 2 years and had never known the 4th basement existed. It required a separate clearance card to access, a card that both Professor Aldrich and Professor Min had to swipe simultaneously. The elevator went down in a way that felt more like it was dropping than descending. The lab itself was enormous. Walls reinforced with mana-dampening material, floor marked with testing zones. Equipment I didn't recognize covering every surface, and in the center, a much larger version of the resonance core, roughly 3 meters across, floating slowly in a containment field. They told me to stand in the center testing zone and activate my skill intentionally. The problem was that for 2 years my old skill had been passive. It activated on its own. I never had to consciously do anything. I had no idea what intentional activation even felt like for me. I stood there, tried to feel something, tried to reach for whatever this new ability was the same way you try to grab smoke. And then, without quite knowing how, something shifted. It felt like a door opening inside my chest. Not a metaphorical door, something that felt physically real. A sensation of space expanding where space shouldn't be, a deep hum that wasn't sound but pressure, resonating outward from somewhere behind my sternum. Every piece of equipment in the lab started activating simultaneously. The large core lit up white, then gold, then a color I don't have a name for. something between violet and the feeling you get right before lightning strikes. The readings on every screen spiked. One monitor actually cracked. Professor Aldrich grabbed the edge of a table. The research division woman started taking notes so fast her hand was practically vibrating. I stopped. The room settled. "What was that?" I asked. "We need a few minutes to process the data," Professor Min said, her voice very steady and very deliberate. She was pressing both hands flat on the console in front of her like she needed something solid to hold on to. They took more than a few minutes. They took 3 hours. During those 3 hours, I sat in a chair in the corner of the lab and watched them confer, in low voices, call people on secured lines, argue quietly about something I couldn't hear, and occasionally look at me with expressions that ranged from fascinated to something that was almost close to afraid. At the end of the 3 hours, Professor Aldrich came and sat across from me. "Here's what we know," he said. "Your skill is a class that the Academy classification system designates in old theoretical texts as a root ability, foundational, pre-elemental, capable of interfacing with the underlying structure of mana itself rather than specific applications of it. In theory, a root ability doesn't do one thing. It does everything at a fundamental enough level that all other abilities are just specialized versions of it." I stared at him. "That means," he continued, "that your ability is not one skill. It is the architecture every skill is built from, with sufficient development, and we have no idea how long that would take or what form it would take. You would potentially be able to replicate, nullify, enhance, or dismantle any other ability in existence." Very long silence. "That seems like a lot," I said. "It is," he said. "It is an incomprehensible amount. They made me sign 17 documents before I left the building. Confidentiality forms, research consent forms, mandatory counseling referral, a form authorizing the Academy to share my anonymized data with the National Hunter Registry, and a form specifically stating that I understood the Academy could not be responsible for any social or personal consequences arising from changes in my public status. That last one should have been a warning. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that the lab's internal data feed had a leak. Not a hacker. Not an outside intrusion. A second-year student in the technology track named Kael, who had been doing maintenance work on the basement sublevel data cables and had accidentally tapped into the live monitoring feed during my testing session. He had watched the entire 3 hours on a small screen on his phone. He didn't understand most of what he'd seen, but he understood the words SSS-rank, because those words appeared on his screen in very large text when the classification engine finally spit out its verdict. And Kael, despite being a genuinely decent person in most circumstances, was also deeply susceptible to the lure of being the first person to know something important. He told one friend. That friend told 3. By the time I walked out of the basement lab and back into the main Academy campus, the information had passed through roughly 40 people. By dinner, it was at 200. By lights out, every single student at Zenith Academy knew that the kid with the weight detection skill had just tested as SS rank. I, of course, knew none of this. I ate dinner alone as usual, went back to my dorm, spent an hour trying to process what had happened by staring at my ceiling, failed to process it, fell asleep. The next morning I walked into the main courtyard and felt the shift immediately. Not a metaphorical shift this time, an actual physical social shift. The kind you feel in your skin before you can identify it consciously. Something about how people were positioned, how conversations stopped, how eyes moved. I got 10 steps into the courtyard before someone spoke. Is it true? I turned. It was a girl named Sarah, one of the top-ranked students in the second year. A-rank Lightning Elemental user. One of those people who had never once spoken to me directly in 2 years. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't categorize because I had genuinely never seen it directed at me before. Something like careful, serious interest. Is what true? I asked. The ranking. The lab results. Everyone's saying you tested as SSS. I opened my mouth, closed it. The confidentiality forms were very specifically not supposed to prevent me from talking, only from releasing official documentation. But I had no idea how to handle this. I had spent 2 years being invisible, and now someone was looking at me like I was important. I don't know what you've heard, I said finally. That's not a denial, she said. It's not a confirmation either. She studied me for a moment. Then she did something that surprised me. She nodded once, like I'd passed some kind of test, and walked away. I turned back toward the main building and found about 30 students were now watching me. That was new. The day got stranger from there. People who had categorically ignored me for 2 years were suddenly finding reasons to walk near me. 2 students from the first year stopped me in the hallway to ask about study notes, which was clearly a pretext for getting close enough to evaluate whether I seemed different. My theory of mana structures professor, a man who had historically graded my work with faint praise and no eye contact, called on me 3 times in one class period. I answered correctly each time, not because of any new ability, just because I'd been paying attention for 2 years and had nothing better to do. But the attention was nothing compared to what happened at the afternoon practical session. Practical sessions at Zenith are structured around combat drills, skill application exercises, and rank sparring. For the last 2 years, my slot in practical sessions had been administrative. I observed. I recorded data for other students. I was, functionally, a very expensive piece of note-taking equipment. That afternoon, the practical session instructor, a towering man named Commander Vress, who ran his sessions like military operations and had never acknowledged my existence, except to hand me a data tablet on arrival, walked up to me before the session started and said, "You're sparring today." I looked at him. "You're cleared for active practical," he said. "Effective this morning. Direct authorization from the department head." Professor Aldrich had moved fast. "I've never sparred," I said. "Officially, I don't have a combat rating." "You have something better than a combat rating," Commander Vress said. And the way he said it was not unkind. It was actually in a restrained military instructor sort of way, almost excited. "We'll start light. Standard beginner pairing, no pressure." Standard beginner pairing meant I'd be matched against a D-rank student for an introductory spar. Low stakes. Controlled conditions. A chance to see if I had any basic combat instincts at all. What Commander Vress had not accounted for was that the words SSS-rank had reached every student in that practical session, which meant no D-rank student wanted to be the person who went easy on an SSS and looked like a coward, and no D-rank student wanted to be the person who went full force on an SSS and got annihilated publicly. The entire room had a crackling, held breath quality before the match even started. My opponent was a student named Davin, D-rank's force manipulation, decent footwork, visibly terrified but trying hard not to show it. He took his starting position across from me with the body language of someone who had decided to give this everything and accept whatever happened. I took my position and felt that door open again. Not fully, just a crack. Just enough for the hum to be present, low and steady at the edge of my awareness. Commander Vress signaled start. Davin moved immediately. Force burst, straight toward me, a basic push application that should have knocked me back 5 meters. Standard D-ranks opener, safe, controlled, designed to test response before committing to anything more serious. The burst hit me. I didn't move, not because I braced for it. Not because I had some physical resistance I didn't know about. I genuinely don't know what happened in that half second. The burst made contact. The hum shifted, and the force that should have sent me flying simply didn't do the thing it was supposed to do. Davin stared. I stared. The room went very quiet. Commander Vress was looking at me the way Professor Aldrich had looked at me the day before, like I was something that required recalculation. "Again," he said to Davin. Davin tried 4 more times. Different applications of his skill, different approach angles, different force levels. Each time, the result was the same. Contact, hum, nothing. By the 5th attempt, I wasn't even consciously doing anything. The ability was operating independently, reading incoming mana and just refusing to allow the interaction that should have followed. After the 5th attempt, Commander Vress held up his hand and Davin stopped. The commander walked into the sparring area. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at the room full of students who were all completely silent. "Who wants to test this?" he asked the room. Then, from the back of the room, a voice. "I will." Everyone turned. Even me. The voice belonged to Oren. Third year. S-rank. Combat specialization. One of only 3's rank students currently enrolled at Zenith Academy, a fact that was relevant because it meant Oren was, at this moment, the most powerful active hunter in the building. He was tall, calm, with the particular stillness of someone who never wasted energy. He had his arms crossed and was watching me with an expression of genuine curiosity, not arrogance. Curiosity, which was somehow more unsettling. "This is a beginner practical session," Commander Vress said. "I know," Oren said. "I'm asking permission anyway." Commander Vress looked at me. I said, "Okay." They cleared the floor. Students pressed back to the walls. Someone had pulled out a recording device. 2 someones. Then 5. Oren walked to the starting position with the same unhurried energy he'd entered with. He wasn't doing any of the warming-up gestures that most fighters use before a serious spar. He just stood there and waited. I stood across from him and felt the hum settle into something steady and deep, more present than it had been during the match with Davin. Commander Vress called start. Oran moved. What happened next is difficult to describe because it happened in roughly 1 second, and I experienced it with a clarity that felt like slow motion, while also being faster than anything I'd ever witnessed. Oren's ability was classified as Elemental Displacement, a rare S-rank skill that allowed him to shift the effective position of mana constructs, including his own body, through space. He used it to simply not be where he appeared to be, arriving behind opponents before they registered he'd moved. He used it on me. He arrived behind me. His hand went to my shoulder in the standard contest point grip that indicated a capture move in non-lethal training. His hand stopped before it made contact. He was close enough that I could hear him exhale once, sharp, like something surprised him. He stepped back, reset, tried again from a different angle, stopped again. The third attempt, he came at full speed with a mana construct around his hand, an actual force application, S-rank level, not enough to seriously injure, but absolutely enough to test limits. It hit the edge of whatever the hum was projecting and dispersed, completely, like it hit air. Oran stepped back and stood there looking at me. The recording devices were very obviously recording. "What is your skill doing right now?" he asked, not challenging, genuinely asking. "I have no idea," I said, which was the complete truth. "Can you feel it?" "Yes." "Can you turn it off?" I thought about that. Tried to close the door. The hum dimmed. I nodded at him. He tried a direct, unenhanced grip to my shoulder. His hand landed normally. He made contact. He looked at his own hand and then at me. "Turn it back on," he said. I opened the door again. He tried the same direct grip. His hand stopped an inch from my shoulder like it had hit an invisible wall, then slid off to the side without connecting. Aren stood back. He was very quiet for a moment. Then he said something that I didn't expect from one of the 3 most powerful students in the academy. "You're going to be a problem for everyone." He didn't say it with hostility. He said it almost like he was thinking out loud, like he was already recalculating something. He wasn't wrong. The recording of that spar hit the internal academy network within an hour, because Zenith had an internal student sharing platform for training footage that was technically monitored but practically very lightly policed. The video got 700 views before administration pulled it, but 700 views in a school of 500 students meant it had been watched multiple times each. By that evening, the story had mutated. The version circulating was no longer F-rank student tests as SSS in evaluation. It was new student tanks and S-ranks full attack without moving. Both things were approximately true. Together they were overwhelming. I ate dinner again. This time alone was different. Alone at dinner used to mean invisible. Now alone at dinner meant the table around me had a noticeable empty radius, as if people weren't sure how close they were allowed to get. Sarah sat down across from me, without asking. She put her tray down, met my eyes, and said, "Don't let this go to your head." "This is day 1, I said. "I don't even know what this is yet." "Good," she said. "Keep that attitude." She picked up her fork. "You're going to need people who can be honest with you." Most people are already figuring out how to get close to you for reasons that have nothing to do with who you are. And you? She gave me a look. I sat down to warn you. That's it. Don't read into it. Noted. She ate. I ate. The empty radius around my table stayed empty, but I could feel it being watched. What I didn't know was that outside the academy, things were already moving. The National Hunter Registry data sharing agreement I'd signed meant that the moment my skill classification was officially uploaded, the registry sent automated alerts to affiliated organizations. Those organizations included major guilds, the government's Hunter Affairs Bureau, and two independent research institutions that tracked anomalous awakening events. The classified SS designation triggered every alert simultaneously. 6 guild representatives sent formal inquiry letters to the academy by the next morning. 3 of them marked urgent. One of them, from a guild called Aegis that handled the country's high-stakes operations, sent a representative in person, not a letter, a person. Professor Aldrich came to find me at breakfast. "You have a meeting," he said. "With who?" "Someone you shouldn't keep waiting." The meeting was in the Academy's formal reception hall, a room I had also never been in because the formal reception hall was for visiting dignitaries and high-level external meetings, and I had until roughly 48 hours ago been neither relevant nor interesting to anyone external. The Aegis representative was a woman who looked about 30, dressed in civilian clothes that were so precisely unremarkable they were clearly designed to be unremarkable. She introduced herself as Neva and shook my hand with the grip of someone who trained very seriously. "I'll be direct," she said, before I had sat down properly. "Aegis wants a meeting with you, not a recruiting pitch, a meeting. We want to understand what you can do, what you're going to need to develop it, and whether there's a mutually beneficial arrangement possible." "I'm a student," I said. "I'm in the middle of the academy program. We know. The meeting would be external to your schedule. Evenings, weekends, no interference with your studies. And if I say no," she smiled, "then you say no. We don't pressure students." A pause. "We do, however, strongly suggest that whoever does get your attention first will have an enormous advantage over everyone else. You're going to need guidance that goes beyond what an academy curriculum is designed to provide. We can offer that." She handed me a card. Simple. Just a contact address and an Aegis emblem. "Think about it," she said. "Don't think too long." She stood up and left. The whole meeting had taken 4 minutes. I looked at the card. Then I looked at Professor Aldrich, who had been standing near the door. "She's not wrong," he said, "about needing guidance. She's also from an organization that has interests," I said, "which means the guidance comes with strings." Professor Aldrich looked at me in a way that surprised me slightly, like he was revising something. "When did you get politically aware?" he asked. "I've had 2 years with nothing to do but watch how things worked around here," I said. "I paid attention." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." I went back to class, sat through Theory of Dimensional Mana, Advanced Combat History, and Applied Skill Integration. Took notes. Participated when called on. Did not visibly change anything about my external behavior. Internally, I was running constant calculations, because here was the thing nobody was saying out loud: an SSS-rank ability that nullifies, replicates, and fundamentally disrupts all other mana-based skills is not just useful. It is threatening. Not theoretically threatening, actually threatening, to every person whose power and status depended on having a skill advantage that nobody else could match. The S-rank hunters whose positions made them untouchable. The guilds whose top fighters were their leverage. The Academy's entire power hierarchy that was built on the assumption that rankings, once established, were roughly stable. All of that became unstable the moment I walked into that lab. And the thing about powerful people who feel unstable, they don't just watch, they move. On the 3rd day, someone tried to intimidate me. Not a student. At least, not just a student. 3rd year, B rank. A guy named Harrow who was known for being connected to several of the external guilds through his family. He cornered me in the corridor between the West Training Block and the main library, which was a low-traffic area at that time of day. He had 2 people with him. "Word of advice," Harrow said. He had the practiced confidence of someone who'd done this kind of thing before, and it had always worked. Whatever you think is happening right now, it's not going to last. People get interested in unusual things. They also move on. My advice is to not make enemies you can't handle while the attention is on you. Is that a threat? I asked. I kept my voice very neutral. It's a courtesy, he said. There are people outside this academy who are watching very carefully. People who don't like uncertainty. You represent uncertainty. It's in your best interest to stay low and let the conversations die down. I looked at him, at his two companions, at the empty corridor. Thank you for the advice, I said. Then I walked to the gap between him and the wall and kept going. He didn't stop me, but I felt him watching me go, and the feeling was not comfortable. I reported the interaction to Professor Aldrich that afternoon, not because I was scared, because I understood that documentation was how things like this got handled, and I had 2 years of watching how the Academy administration operated. Aldrich listened, made notes, and told me the Academy had a formal complaint process and that he'd flag it. You did well not escalating, he said. I didn't escalate because I'm not sure what would have happened if I activated my skill involuntarily, I said. I don't have enough control yet to know where the edges are. Aldrich looked at me for a moment. That's the most important thing you've said since this all started. He was right. That was the problem nobody wanted to name directly. An ability we didn't understand yet, that operated on foundational mana architecture, that had already absorbed and deflected an S-rank attack without my consciously directing it. What were its actual limits? What happened if it got fully active in a high-stress situation with no intentional control? We didn't know, and not knowing was dangerous. Not for the people around me necessarily. For me, for my ability to stay here, stay in the program, stay in the situation long enough to actually develop what I apparently had. Control. That was the only thing that mattered right now. Professor Min started running daily sessions with me in the restricted lab. She was methodical, patient, and quietly brilliant in a way she'd never had reason to show me before. We worked on intentional activation, partial activation, targeted application, and most importantly, deliberate deactivation. The ability had a will of its own in moments of external threat, which was useful defensively but needed to be layered with conscious override. On the 4th day, I managed partial activation for 6 minutes with precise targeting. On the 7th day, I held it at 20% capacity, with full control for 12 minutes, while Professor Min threw increasingly high-level skill activations at me from different directions. On the 10th day, something new happened. I was in the middle of a controlled session, running partial activation with targeting, and I felt the hum shift into a pattern I hadn't felt before. Not absorption, not deflection, something that felt like reaching out, like extending rather than containing. Stop, I said. Professor Min stopped her current activation immediately. What? She asked. The ability just did something different, I said. Define different. Instead of blocking or absorbing, it reached outward, toward the mana in the room. She was very still. Did you direct it to do that? No. Did it make contact with any external mana source? I stopped it before it got there. She sat down, took a breath. Kael, the theoretical framework we've been working from, says that a root ability and developmental phase will begin to expand its range of functions as it becomes more stable. Absorption and deflection are passive protective expressions. Active reach is an intermediate offensive or integrative expression. It means the ability is progressing. Progressing toward what? We don't know yet, she said. But we need to be extremely careful. If the active reach phase makes contact with an established high-rank skill without proper control, we don't know what it does. Whether it copies it, disrupts it, absorbs it, or something else entirely. So I need more control before I let it reach. You need infinitely more control before you let it reach, she said. Because when it does, and it will probably be the most significant thing that's happened in hunter skill development in recorded history. No pressure. I worked harder. The daily sessions with Professor Min ran 3 hours. My academic workload hadn't changed. I was sleeping 6 hours a night and spending the remaining time either in training in class or trying to mentally process the sustained low-grade weirdness of being the most talked-about student in an institution where I had previously been the most ignored. Sura became a regular presence. Not warmly, exactly. She was sharp and direct, and she didn't soften things. But she was consistent, and consistency was something I was finding valuable when everything else was shifting constantly. She'd sit with me at meals and give me blunt assessments of what was being said about me by the social circle she was plugged into. And I'd give her theoretically accurate explanations of mana structures that were relevant to her skill training, which she found useful. Neither of us acknowledged we were doing each other favors. It worked. Lorik, my former dormmate, tried to reconnect. He came to me on day 12 with a smile that I recognized from 2 years ago, the easy, warm, collegial Lorik smile that had preceded him stopping sitting with me, stopping acknowledging me in class, and telling someone I'd overheard that he didn't see the point of maintaining friendships that didn't have mutual benefit. "I always knew you had something in you," he said. "You literally stopped sitting with me because you told someone I was dead weight," I said. He blinked. "I said that in the East Dining Hall about 14 months ago. I was walking behind you. I was walking behind you." Lorik went quiet for a moment. Then, to his mild credit, he didn't pretend. "Yeah," he said. "I did. That was wrong of me." "Yes," I said. "I'm trying to apologize." I said, "I'm trying to apologize." "I heard you," I said. "I'm not sure what you want me to do with it." He left without getting what he'd come for. I wasn't angry at him, exactly. I was tired in a particular way that came from years of understanding that most social relationships in high-stakes competitive environments are conditional, and knowing that didn't make it not sting. I focused on the ability. Day 15, Professor Min introduced a new element to the training sessions. Instead of using her own skill activations as the external mana stimulus, she brought in 2 additional instructors with different skill types. 1 earth element manipulation, 1 probability adjustment at B rank, and had them activate simultaneously at moderate output while I maintained partial active reach mode. The ability touched both incoming mana streams. It did not absorb them. It did not deflect them. It read them. That's the only word I have for what it felt like. The hum connected to both streams, and in the moment of contact, I could feel the structure of each skill, the way you feel a shape in the dark with your hands. The architecture of earth manipulation. Heavy, layered, load-bearing. The architecture of probability adjustment, branching, fractured, constantly subdividing. I could feel how they worked at the level below their expression. Then the hum pulled back and the contact ended. I stood very still for a moment. "What happened?" Professor Min asked. "I felt them," I said. "The skills. Not what they were doing. What they are." She was quiet. "Is that replication?" one of the instructors asked. "Not yet," I said. "It was more like doctors reading a language. I understand the structure. I don't have the vocabulary yet." Professor Min wrote something down. Then she looked up and said, "Kael, we need to escalate the security classification on these sessions. Immediately. Because of what just happened. Because of what just happened, plus what it implies is next," she said. "If you can read the structure of any skill on contact, the next stage is interpretation. And after interpretation, replication," I said. She nodded once, very carefully. We stared at each other across the lab for a moment that felt like it had weight. An ability that could read, interpret, and replicate any skill was not a student ability. It was not an academy-grade power. It was the kind of thing that had global implications, that affected the entire system of hunter rankings, guild hierarchies, and national power balances that had been stable for decades. I was 17 years old. I had been the joke of this school for 2 years, and I was apparently carrying a weapon that made every existing hierarchy obsolete. The sessions stayed classified. The external guild inquiries kept coming. Administration started handling my presence at academy events differently, quietly ensuring I was never in large, uncontrolled crowds, ensuring there was always someone from the faculty nearby when I was in public spaces. I noticed. I didn't push back, not yet. What I focused on was the skill. Every day. Because I understood something that maybe the professors and the guild representatives and the government officials hadn't fully internalized yet. I had no control over this thing. Not real control. Not yet. It was operating on instinct, on its own primitive logic, and until I genuinely understood it and could direct it with precision, I was a variable, not an asset. Variables make everyone nervous. Assets give people leverage. I needed to become an asset before someone decided a variable was too dangerous to leave unmanaged. Day 19. The Academy held its midterm public ranking ceremony. A tradition. Every 6 months, the current rank standings were publicly updated on the grand ranking board in the main hall. Professors, students, and sometimes external observers attended. It was a ceremonial thing, mostly, but it mattered to people. Rankings were identity here. My name appeared at the top. Not because I had officially competed in any ranked events. Not because I'd formally challenged anyone. Because the system had been updated with my evaluation results, and the evaluation results were now part of official record, and the official record fed the ranking board. SSS. One name at the top. Mine. The hall went quiet in the way large spaces go quiet when everyone in them processes the same thing simultaneously. I was standing near the back of the hall. I had not expected to be on the board at all. I'd assumed the classification would keep my results in a restricted tier. Apparently, administrative protocols had overridden that, or someone had made a decision. Every face in that hall turned toward me, and I understood in that moment that I had completely run out of the option to be invisible. The thing about visibility when you've been invisible is that you don't have practice with it. You don't have the instincts. You don't have the calibration. You don't know how to receive attention without flinching, without retreating, without doing the things you learned to do when attention was either non-existent or hostile. I stood there, didn't flinch, didn't retreat. Oren caught my eye across the hall. He gave me a single nod, like a soldier acknowledging a comrade. Not warmth. Recognition. Sarah was standing near the front. She looked at the board, looked at me, and her expression said approximately, "I told you so. This is going to be complicated and you're handling it wrong already," all with one look. She was remarkable at that. Hera was also in the hall. He looked at the board and then at me with an expression that had shifted from the one in the corridor. Less practice confidence, more calculation, and in the back of the hall, near the observers section, was a man I didn't recognize. Older 50s, wearing a government issue coat with a Hunter Affairs Bureau insignia, he was watching me with no particular expression at all, just careful, sustained attention. He had a tablet in his hand and he was writing something. That was when I realized that whatever I had thought this was, an internal academy situation, a personal development arc, a weird 2-week period of adjustment, was none of those things. This was the beginning, not the beginning of my power. Not the beginning of my story. The beginning of the moment when everyone who mattered started moving, the guild representatives, the government officials, the academy leadership who were already navigating between protecting a student and managing a political situation, the people like Harrow who had interests in the current hierarchy staying stable, the people like Oren who were reassessing what stable even meant, the people like Sarah who were trying to figure out what came next, and somewhere behind all of it, the ability itself. Still learning what it was. Still expanding toward its own edges. Still reading the mana in every room I entered. Cataloging, understanding, moving through its developmental stages according to no timetable anyone could predict. I looked at the ranking board, at my name, at the number that didn't fit any category anyone had been prepared for. Then I looked back at the man from the Hunter Affairs Bureau. He was still writing. He glanced up, met my eyes, and he smiled. Very slightly, the smile of someone who had just confirmed something they'd been suspecting and found the confirmation both satisfying and concerning. He closed his tablet, turned, walked out of the hall. 3 hours later, Professor Aldrich called me into his office and told me that the National Hunter Affairs Bureau had formally requested a direct meeting with me. Not a guild, not a research institution, the government itself. What do they want? I asked. Officially, an assessment. Unofficially, he paused for slightly too long. Kael, he said, what they want is to understand whether you are an asset or a threat, and the answer to that question will determine a great deal about what the next chapter of your life looks like. I sat with that for a moment. When's the meeting? End of the week, he said. They're sending someone senior. I stood up. then I have 4 days to be further along than I am now. I went straight back to the lab, because here's the thing. Nobody in that hall, nobody writing in their tablets, nobody sending urgent guild inquiries had fully understood yet. I wasn't a variable. I wasn't a threat. I wasn't an unknown waiting to be categorized by people with clipboards and government clearances. I was someone who had spent 2 years being treated like a footnote, who had learned to observe rather than react, who had developed a patience and a clarity of vision that came specifically from being underestimated so thoroughly and for so long that I'd had nothing to do but get very, very good at understanding how things actually work. And now, I had a skill that could read the architecture of any power in existence. I wasn't afraid of the government meeting. I was looking forward to it, because in 4 days, when that senior official sat down across from me and tried to determine whether I was an asset or a threat, what they were going to find was someone who had already read every move they were planning to make, was 3 steps ahead of the conversation, and had absolutely no intention of being anyone's variable. The door opened. The hum settled in, steady and deep and waiting. This was only the beginning, and I was ready.